Welcome again to the DS Incubator. We are still on the series about working with a terminal, and this is the previous last session. Today we're going to be talking about a multi-user system from the perspective of a regular user, and next time and last meetup of the series we're going to be talking about a multi-user system but from the perspective of an administrator of the system. Which, if we are talking about, for example, my laptop or your laptop, the administrator and the user of that system is the same person, and the total number of users is probably one. But that's not necessarily the case always. So a system could have only one, but could have many users. And that's the idea that I would like to kind of convey today, that most systems, even your laptops, can be a multi-user system. And what challenges it brings, like for example, you may see this error, permission denied in some occasions, and not understand what's happening, like how I created a file and I don't have permission to use it, like what's going on. Like the mental model that we're going to be building today hopefully will help debug that kind of problem. The meetup is presented in the form of a use case. We are going to be creating a command called hi, which is going to greet us by our username. The objectives is to log in into a system that has potentially multiple users using our username and password. Then we are gonna extract or evaluate the value of environment variables that will be useful in our use case. We're gonna also write our hi command first as a script that we can run with the program bash, with the command bash. And then we're going to transform that script into a more common command, something that we can just type the name of the thing of the command and the thing happens. So for that we're going to make that script executable as a command. So that's the what we have for the menu today. And next time we're going to be learning. I think that the use case is going to be installing software, but the idea of, in general, the idea of using a system from the perspective of an administrator. So the session today is in the folder 4, here somewhere, here in my view code, permission denied, and I'm gonna leave this here on the side. I'm gonna be working with a computer environment that is reproducible. If you want, you can use Docker to reproduce it. You don't have to, but you can if you want to see exactly the same things that I see here. So this Docker container that I'm running in my computer is actually creating a server that in this particular case lives inside my computer, but it doesn't have to. It could live externally. So the experience that you get when you log into this URL is the same experience that you would get if you are a user of, for example, a remote server that I may maintain for 2 degrees, and you are an analyst that wants to use RStudio on this remote server. So you just paste the link in your browser, and you're presented with this interface where you log in. You log in as your user. So in this case, the user of this server is called RStudio. So I'm not going to log in with my name, my real name Mauro. I'm going to log in with my username for this system, which is RStudio. And I'm given a password by the administrator of the system. So I'm going to use that password here. Usually you can also change the password that you're given. You have that right as a user to choose your own password. And but that's not something that we're going to be using today. Also, we are not going to be using RStudio itself. I think it's a nice thing to demonstrate, because in our experience, more commonly analysts could log into something like an RStudio server. But the thing that I want to show today is all in the terminal, so I don't need to do more than just show you the terminal here. So I'm going to move this a little bit here to the left, clear this up with Control L, and here to the right I'm going to put the notes of today's session. So I'm going to detach here this, move it to the right, and use it as a guide. So we already covered the login, and now we're going to be first inspecting some of the environment variables that we're going to be using in the rest of the use case. So, and bear with me, the use case is coming soon, but we first need to explore a few things. So you know that I logged in as the user RStudio, so you could find unsurprising that if I do echo, so echo is this command that if you say echo hi, it will respond hi. But if you say something more interesting, like, okay, echo and evaluate the value of a variable that exists in the system that the administrators or someone other than you set for you. So the environment variable called user with capital letters, user, holds the name of the user that logged into that system. So in this case, we would expect an echo hi RStudio, and that's what we get. So we can also use echo to say get the value of the home directory of this user. So capital letters home, give me /home/RStudio. That's simply a directory, a path in the system where the user RStudio has privileges to do anything. And then finally, and more interestingly, and more complex too, so I'm going to clear this up, Control L, is the value of the environment variable path, which is going to take a little bit to explain, but it's important. So what you get here might look a little confusing. I'm going to expand this a bit, make it bigger. So this is a bunch of paths, like places inside the system that are separated by columns. This column separates the first path from the second path. Oh, sorry, I highlight too many things here. And there are some paths that will show up in the use case later on. For example, the path /usr/bin is one path that you're gonna see in the rest of the demo for a little bit. So what are these paths? Well, these paths are locations in your system that your system is kind of continuously watching for commands. So if, for example, a command like bash, or like ls, they live somewhere in your computer. So you can know where they live with the command which. So which ls will tell you, okay, ls lives in user/bin, and there is where it lives, right? So same thing for like which bash. I can find out where it is. Okay, it lives in the same location, /user/bin/bash. So this path here, right? So because these commands ls and bash are located in a directory that is known by this environment variable path, then they do behave as commands. So you type the name and they do what they are supposed to do. But if you type the name of something that doesn't exist, like nothing, whatever, then the console will respond, okay, nothing is a command that has not been found. And the reasons may be two. It may be that the command does not exist, as in this case, but the command may exist, but it may be in a location that the path environment variable doesn't know about, so it doesn't get discovered. So this idea is probably the core of the solving the use case that we're going to be working with today. So that's all kind of the background. It was quite a bit actually that we need to know. So let's move on and explore. Okay, so what is a place in the system that the user RStudio could put commands so that they get automatically discovered? And the answer to that question is going to be, well, okay, if you can evaluate echo, if you can evaluate path, and you already see somewhere in this very long string of things, somewhere that says home user, home RStudio, then you're done. But we aren't, because we don't see that, right? So we need to make a modification to this path so that somewhere inside the home directory of RStudio, of the user RStudio, there is like a directory that where we can put commands and they get discovered, and so they work as commands. So the answer to that is going to be inspecting a file that I already talked about in previous meetups. It's called profile, and it lives in your home directory. So cat home/.profile gives you the contents of that file. And close to the end, you will see that there is a couple of references to path. I'm not interested in showing you the details of the code itself, but this comment instead. So the comment here says that the code below, what it does is includes the user's private bin, and bin is no more and no less than just a folder. So if you are the user, say RStudio, then under RStudio you can have a folder called bin, and if you do have that folder, if it exists, then that path, that folder will act as a place where you can put commands, because it will be automatically included in the path environment variable. So let's experiment with that. So that means that let's do an ls inside my home, and I see that there's a couple of folders, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 folders, but none of them is called bin. So I have to make one with make dir bin. So now an ls of home, which is the same place where I'm standing right now, shows that, okay, now I do have a bin folder. Let's clear this up, Control L. So because you do have that folder, you would hope that if you do echo $path, you would now get that path, the path to home RStudio bin, listed here somewhere. But unfortunately, that hope is not met by reality, because reality is slightly a little bit more complex. And the complexity comes simply from the fact that the file.profile gets read only once when you create a new terminal, when you start a new terminal. So because we started the terminal that we are using before we modified the file, basically before we created the bin directory in a place that could be discovered by the file, then that directory isn't included. The variable was defined before we actually added the bin folder. So the solution is simple. We just create a new terminal, and now the file.profile could have been read again, and right now the bin folder inside the user's private directory could have been discovered, and thus if I do an echo $caps path, now the directory home ruser bin exists in the path. So that means that we can change our change directory with cd inside bin now. So here's where we are now, and any command that we write inside here should be automatically discovered, and we can use it from anywhere in the user's environment, in the user's home, wherever the user is. That command eventually will just work. But we still don't have any command, so let's create one. I'm gonna create one very simple command, but first we're gonna not create it as a command, we're gonna create it as a script, in the same way that in R, for example, you can create a script, an R script, a file that ends in .r, and you can put whatever code you have there, and then you can source it with the function source, and that code will be executed. The same thing you can do here. So you can create, I'm going to use the program Vim to create a file that is called hi, and in here I'm going to type echo echo hi, but that's boring, as we said before, so we're going to add we're going to evaluate user. So that way, when we invoke the program, or when we source, if you will, the program hi, we would get a hi RStudio in this case, because the user that is running it is RStudio. So I'm using Vim. If you need to learn more about Vim, there is a mention of it in 2 meetups before of this same series. I'm gonna move to the commands mode with escape, and then type shift column. You can't see that because it's covered by this, but W saves the file, and Q quits. So I effectively have modified the file hi. You can inspect it with cat, and here it is, what the contents are. So now we need to use the command, the program bash, to run that file, that script file that we just wrote. So when we do bash hi, we get the answer that we want, hi RStudio. So this is again like in R, running source with the name of a file that you have created, and that's cool. But we want hi to just work by typing hi without saying bash, right? So there's 2 things that we need to do for that. So if I run that, I'm gonna get this message that inspired the name or the title of this meetup, which is permission denied. So the file kind of exists there, but we can't execute it. We are going to tackle that in a moment, but before, I do that, there's one thing that it's best practice to specify. So we're going to enter the file again. We want to modify the file to say that incorporate inside the file itself which program needs to run this script. So in R it would be R, and here it could be bash. So we're going to be a bit more, again, life is not so easy, and we don't just say bash. We wish, but we have to say something more than that. So the way you specify that this is the declaration of the program that runs this script, it's just a convention. It starts with a pound and a bang, so it's called shebang. And now, you could say bash, you wish, but remember that bash is actually a command somewhere in the system. So it's better to specify the full path to that command. And if you remember from what we did before, it was usr/bin/bash. So that's the full path to the bash command in this system, which we found out before with the which command. So I think that's all we need to do in terms of editing this file. So I'm going to save and quit. But there is one more thing to still solve the permission denied problem. And I'm not going to get super deep in that. I'm just going to say that the reason is because this file is not executable. Because you don't have permission yet to execute the file that you yourself created. How do you inspect permissions? Okay, you do it with the command ls, but you have to add the -l flag. And now we're going to say, okay, let's inspect the permissions of hi, right? So the place you could be looking for is this first bit of the string that you get. I'm not going to be super specific other than saying, okay, R stands for read, W stands for write, and there should be an X somewhere for execute that there is not. So permissions is a huge topic and it could cover more than one meetup, so I'm not going to get there. All I need to tell you is that as a user, all you need to know in terms of permissions is that if you want to create a command and you want it to be executable, it has to have X's in a few places here. So how do you do that? Okay, it's not so hard, somehow it makes some sense. So you have to change ch the mode. It would be nicer to say that the command was named change permissions, but it's not. Life is hard. It's called chmod, change mode. And now you said you want to add something. The permission that you want to add is this permission to execute. And what you want to execute, the command hi. So this thing does the trick. So if I now rerun ls-l hi, you will see some changes. You see now that there is X's in a few places. Again, permissions is a big topic, so I'm not going to explain why it appears in more than one place. And also, you see that there is a nice little color here compared to the one here. So this now behaves differently. If I type hi, it just gets the answer. And this is not only because I'm inside the directory bin. I can also change the directory to say home, and from here I can say hi, and it will respond the same thing. There's a few takeaways. I hear a hand up, but I'm gonna push through the takeaways and then dedicate all the rest of the time to discussing your questions or comments. So takeaways, every system, including your own laptop, can be a multi-user system if you define it to be so. Users can act mostly under their home directory, and they are generally quite restricted. For example, they can't execute programs that they create unless they change the mode, as the next bullet point says. So to make a script, a bash script, executable as a command, you have to use the command chmod, which change the mode or change the permissions of the file, and then you add with plus and x, which means executable. So you add executable permissions, and then you have to name which is the script that you want to make executable. And finally, for your commands to behave as such and be discovered by your system, they can't live just anywhere. They have to be located in some of the directories that are listed by the environment variable path. So as a user, the most sensible place to place your commands could be under your home. Okay, in this case, actually, I made a mistake here. I should have said home, in this case, RStudio, then /bin. So the home of RStudio is home RStudio, and then the user creates a new folder called bin, and there is where you put your commands. If you do that in most systems, your commands will be automatically discovered and work as you expect. Okay, let's go to your faces here, and did I hear a hand? Maybe not. Maybe it was my dream. Anyway, that gets us to the end of the contents that I wanted to cover. Do we have any comments here or questions?
No, just, yeah, that's a lot to cover in one session like this.
Exactly, yeah.
But I mean, since we have the time and there's only two of us, I mean, I think it makes sense, at least contextually to the thing, to mention why there are three sets of RWX things.
Perfect. Yeah, given that we have the time, let's do that. So at least we now know kind of what keywords you need to type if you want to learn more about these things. So we're talking about permissions. We're talking about chmod. So I think if you start googling those things, you will eventually get to the information that you need. The long story made short is the following. So there is three sets of permissions. So if I do an ls, so let's do first, we have to change directory to bin. Here, if I do an ls, there is this hi command. So let's do an ls minus l for hi, and we see this string. So the way to understand this is divide this bit, the permissions bit, in three blocks, each containing 3 characters. So the first block has rwx. That is the block that belongs to the owner of the file. In this case, the person or the user that created the file, that owns the file, is RStudio, and actually it is listed here. So RStudio can read, can write, and can execute this file. But in a multi-user system, you have more than just RStudio. You potentially have other users, and those users might also belong to different groups. It's very convenient to say, okay, if there is 10 users, maybe 5 of them belong to the group of, think of them as teams, right? Like people that, are in one particular group or one particular team may have privileges to do things that other people in other teams and other groups do not. So that's why a multi-user system has the notion of group, which is the one that is described, whose permissions are described in the second block in the permissions string. So the group in this case is also the group RStudio, which is a default group. So every new user that is added to a system automatically belongs to a group that has their own name. So this particular file that was created here, we already discussed the permissions for the owner, for RStudio as an owner, and RStudio as a member of the group RStudio has permissions to read this file, has permissions to execute this file, but not to write. So cannot, like another user, not RStudio, because the privileges of an owner will override the permissions of the group. But another user added to the group RStudio would not be able to write this file, meaning that they couldn't, for example, be able to change the command. Right, but they can read it, they can see the contents of the file hi, and they can run it, they can use the command hi, if the command hi is in their path. And then finally, the third component of the permission string is basically anywhere else. So if, say, I am logging into this system as Mauro and not as RStudio, and say that I do not belong to the RStudio group, then I will be just another one, so-called others, so other users. And then the permissions that would apply to me logged in as Mauro would be in the ones in the third component of this string, meaning that I would have the right to read this file to see what it contains. I would have permission to execute it and make it work, but again I wouldn't have permissions to write this file. I couldn't change it, right? There is ways to change all of this, to make a file, not readable, not executable, not writable, but that's beyond the meetup of today. Some of that we might touch on some of that next time, because we're gonna be talking about working a multi-user system from the perspective of a super user, of a privileged user, of an administrator of the system. But for now, we are looking at the multi-level system from the perspective of a regular user. So a regular user, and to wrap up today's meetup, can, for example, do a bunch of things, all of them within the scope of their own home. And one of the things that they can do is create commands. And to make them work as commands, they need to put them in a directory such as home bin that is discovered by the environment variable path. And one extra step that they need to do is to change, because by default most files won't have execution privileges, so you have to add them with the command chmod plus x and the name of the command that you want to make executable. So okay, that was basically a wrap up. So let's go back to your faces. CJ, do you have any other thought of what I might be missing from the perspective of the users that we need to communicate?
I think eventually it gets interesting to understand that a user can potentially knowingly or unknowingly run a command as a different user. This is ultimately a very important concept because it comes into play if you're a user with limited privileges and then you want to install some software that you want to be available, and you may install that, but parts of it may not be available because they need to run with permissions of a super administrator, and then there's also the opportunity to install it as a super administrator using the sudo command and stuff. This is, I think, where things get really complicated for someone that hasn't really used an environment with that kind of mentality.
Complexity, more mental model. So next time I plan to work with sudo. We're gonna be using with the same user RStudio, but with the sudo command as a prefix, so that basically the RStudio user can act for specific actions on behalf of another user that has superpower that is called root. So RStudio, when you say, instead of saying RStudio, if you say sudo RStudio, next time you will see that that normal user becomes a super user, acts on behalf of the so-called root user, and they can do just about anything. So that's something that I think of, getting into more detail next time, DJ. Is that what you're talking about, or is there any other way to act as another user?
Well, there are also ways to log in, create a subshell, I guess, as a different user.
Yeah.
Which I rarely do, but I imagine some people do.
Perfect.
Frequently. But I think it's this is something that we on our normal laptops, if we're using Windows or Mac or a Windows Linux windowed version, we often abstract this process. When you're working in the terminal, you need to be more conscious of it. You need to pay attention to the prompts in the terminal so that you see which user you're using.
Yeah.
And you have to have some awareness of when you might want to use sudo, because you can install software, but then it's only located underneath of your home directory, and then another user may not be able to use it. So there's a lot of it ends up causing a lot of questions about what's the most appropriate way to install software or change permissions of software. Or you were pointing out in this, there's a user bin folder that's usually accessible to everyone, but then often users have a bin folder underneath their own home directory that's only accessible to them. So it can create quite a lot of complication.
So one I would like to keep that recorded here. One big motivation for me to talk about these things that might seem too complex is the following. Even well into my work as a professional software developer, I didn't know these things, and I was working for the Smithsonian in a system. The Smithsonian Institution, has a lot of IT control, and I was given a computer, and I thought, okay, it's gonna work just as any other computer I had before, but it wasn't. So basically, a lot of programs failed to install, like Docker, for example. And I didn't know about the complexity of multi-user systems. I didn't know that I was an unprivileged user. So I, as an owner of my computer, I did not have permission to install, for example, Docker and many other programs, because the super users were the IT department. So I had to request permission to them. So not knowing that caused me so many struggles, because I was trying to follow tutorials about how to work with Docker and installing it, and everyone's like, it's working for everyone, but it's not working for me. And I never thought that the reason was that a computer that I owned and that was the only user did not have the privileges for me to install that software. So this is not for you to...
Working in that type of environment can become even more complicated, because often, like, IT super administrator can also restrict which ports your network cards can communicate on, and which it can proxy your internet through a corporate server that redirects certain URLs to certain things. So yeah, it can get really dicey when you're using a system that's managed by an IT department.
Someone else, yeah.
And this is relevant for like, at least in the Pakta team, especially with the banks who are working, they have to either help a user use the software inside of that type of environment, or even worse, like program software that's intended to be used in that situation, but not really knowing all the complexities of that can really cause a lot of confusion. We've had lots of problems with installing software, accessing certain URLs, accessing IP addresses and stuff like that, going through proxies, and that can all be really complicated.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is really complicated to be able to administer all those things and to manage them, but my motivation here is to at least make you aware of that complexity, so that you're not like me, like bumping your head against the wall, not even knowing what's going on. Had I known that it was beyond my control, I wouldn't have wasted my time. I would just call IT, So this is all I would like people to take away. Is, okay, the system, this is as much as I can do within the scope of my user environment, my user directories. And then these are things that are beyond my scope. I'm not intending here to teach you how to manage a multi-level system, a multi-user system, but to know that the complexity is there, and then when you need that level of permissions, then you just need to talk to a relevant person. At 2 degrees, for example, I'm staying at 2 degrees, and that person might be me. Might be, hey, Mauro, I need to install this software in this remote server that you gave me access to, but I can't install it. So, okay, then I can install it for you. That's all I need to get away from.
It also comes up, I think, even in our like Windows and Mac machines. For instance, I have two users, like a personal account and a work account on my laptop. And if I install, so like ARM is managing its packages by default, I think, in a user level package location. It can be told to put it in a system wide location if you have permissions to do that. But so then I have had the case where, like, I install a package I need in my personal account, and then I'm trying to like update it or change it, or in my work account, then I'm getting all these permission errors just in installing the package. So sometimes even in the most ordinary rudimentary kind of tasks you need to do on a multi-user system, there can be conflicts or difficulties with that.
Well, I think we need to wrap up because we went beyond the time by quite a lot. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Ciao.
Ciao.